Well, it's good to have everybody in attendance with us this morning as we are continuing through our Matthew study. We're coming to the end of it. We are still dealing more with the trial as Jesus is being brought before Pilate, and we are gaining further, as we've said, all this study of the book of Matthew and really of the Bible itself is just the study of people, character traits, how people are going to behave, how people are going to respond, how they are supposed to respond, how it is in fact that we're supposed to be. So we have contrasted for us what the world is doing with the Pharisees, Sadducees, chief priests, and the elders, Pilate, for that matter, Herod, how they think, contrasted to how the Son of God is thinking and how he is actually behaving. Matthew 27:21, the governor, Pilate, answered and said unto them, Whether the twain will ye that I release unto you? They said, Barabbas. Pilate saith unto them, What shall I do then with Jesus, which is called Christ? And they all say unto him, Let him be crucified. And the governor said, Why, what evil hath he done? But they cried out the more, saying, Let him be crucified. When Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water, washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person, see ye to it. Then answered all the people and said, His blood be on us and our children. We've already gone into a discussion of Pilate, his lack of character, his lack of strength, his lack of courage throughout all of this, and that there's just, though he is able to see the fact that Jesus is innocent, there's still nothing admirable about Pilate. There's just nothing good to say about Pilate from this. Because to have an innocent man and to allow the mob to overrule you and to overrun you completely undermines and does away with any of the good characteristics that might actually end up being there. So as we mentioned, Pilate was a man led by political thinking. In this scene is the culmination of what the children of Israel said long ago, way back in the Old Testament, 1 Samuel chapter 8 and verse 5, and we're going to read this context, where they said before Samuel, Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. This is what you get when you try to be like the world. It's corruption, it's impurity, it's injustice. So going back to 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 11, is God telling Samuel what he needs to tell the people so as to warn them. You do not need to head down this road. If you head down this road, there's only going to be trouble. He said, This will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen. And some shall run before his chariots. And he will appoint him captains over thousands and captains over fifties, and will set them to ear his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war, and instruments of his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be confectionaries, and to be cooks, and to be bakers. And he will take your fields, and your vineyards, and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take the tenth of your seed, and of your vineyards, and give to his officers, and to his servants. And he will take your men servants, and your maid servants, and your goodliest young men, and your asses, and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your sheep, and ye shall be his servants. And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which ye shall have chosen you. And the Lord will not hear you in that day. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, Nay, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. Right here is the very struggle that we are up against on a constant basis. Well, here's what I think we should do. Here's how I think it should be done. Even when you have clear instruction and clear warning from God, no, that's not going to work. And the people respond, nevertheless, we're not going to listen. That is pride and arrogance. That is a haughty spirit. to have the man of God in front of you saying, hey, you need to listen to God. And here's what he says. All the king is going to do is take. And that's what you want? And God's not just making this up. Couldn't the people look around at the other nations? Oh, that's what they're doing. Make us a king like the other nations. Well, okay, let's just look at these kings and what are they up to? They're taking. You had been brought out of Egypt where you were underneath a Pharaoh. And what did he do? Took. Oh no, but this time it'll be different. We won't go that way. This won't happen to us. Yes, it will. It always does. Never fails. And these are Israelites. These are the people of God. And he gives them a direct message, and just flat out refuses it, and God says, fine. Have your way. But when it comes time for you to realize the mistake that you've made, it's going to be too late.
It's going to say, let's put a pope in.
Right, yeah, exactly. Let's put this one-man rule in. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, put that down in your notes. And then, here's where this ended up leading them in the time frame where we are actually studying. Here we are at the crucifixion of Christ, and we're looking at John's account, John 19:15. But they cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate saith unto them, shall I crucify your king? And look at how the Israelites respond. The chief priest answered, we have no king but Caesar. Seriously? You are supposed to be the chief priest of the Most High God. And this is what's coming out of your mouth? That's because of what's going on in your head. As a man thinks, so he is. Oh no, we respect God, we reverence God. No, you don't, and this tells me it. Well, no, we're offering the sacrifices. That doesn't matter. Look at what you said. Right? Here's the truth of it. And this shows where they really are. They had stopped serving God a long time ago. And even with this, for them saying, we have no king but Caesar, even that's a lie. Because with these individuals, who's actually their king? Themselves. And that's what Paul writes about in the Roman letter. Those that do not serve God, but they serve their own bellies, their own desires, and they set aside the will of God. That is what has gotten Israel in trouble all throughout their history, and it's what gets people in trouble today. And even in a situation of knowing, well, yeah, I know what the Bible says, but I'm going to do this. That's not serving God. That's serving yourself. That's your own wisdom. That's your own judgment coming into play. That's worldliness. And we're supposed to be letting loose of that and doing things and thinking about things the way in which God would handle these things. So Pilate, as we mentioned, is trying to please everyone. Keep Rome happy, keep the Jews happy, keep the followers of Christ happy. I won't crucify him, but I'll scourge him. Can't do it. Here's the trouble that you get yourself into every single time that you try to please everyone. It's impossible, and you end up perverting, corrupting the truth, and you end up compromising. Every single time. This post was made, it says 4 days ago, but I can't remember when the actual time frame was. But this is Brad Harab, one of our brethren. And it's just, it's funny how brethren will post stuff like this. But again, like we said with Israel and wanting a king, well, let's watch these people and see how they actually do. Brad Harab, who is a well-known brother at the Brotherhood, and he travels all around doing speaking engagements primarily on scientific facts in the Bible and refuting evolution. But he posted this and said, "Hey church, please stop making decisions based on whether or not someone will leave. Make your decisions based on the Bible. If they leave, then likely they were not truly," I'm sure he was trying to put converted there, "converted to Christ to begin with. Sometimes you have to separate the wheat from the chaff." Addition by subtraction. Now, I approve of this message, but I don't approve of the one saying it. Because I know the kind of people Brad Harrod runs around with. He runs around with a whole host of people that he should be separating himself from. But he doesn't. And thus truths like this just end up becoming Facebook statuses. Just for clicks, just for likes. And it's like, oh yeah, that's right. Well, okay, start cutting people out. No, we're not going to do that. They know what the Bible says. They know what to do. But they're just like Pilate. They do not have the courage to do it. Then verse 26. "Then released he Barabbas unto them, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the common hall and gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers. And they stripped him and put on him a scarlet robe. And when they had platted a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they spit upon him and took the reed and smote him on the head. And after that they had mocked him, they took the robe off from him and put his own raiment on him and led him away to crucify him." Now I have a few things underlined here that I want us to stop and to think about. When he had scourged Jesus before he was delivered to be crucified. That's the whipping with the cat of nine tails. And then we're told that after this scourging, they stripped him, put on a scarlet robe. Then they smote him with a reed on the head. But then verse 31. They then took the robe off from him and put his own raiment back on him. Ever consider the pain that's presented with what's being described? This isn't just a list of details for the sake of giving us details. When you scourge somebody, and in the way in which the Romans would do it, tied to a pillar, and then just beaten till your back is raw and bloody. Blood, but not just blood is coming out. When you cut yourself, there's a clotting agent inside of your body that's trying to stop the bleeding. So what happens, for example, if you were to put a Band-Aid, or not even a Band-Aid, just gauze, on top of that blood and that clotting agent, and then you took that gauze off. You're reopening the wound. Each time that this is being done, scourged, robe put on him, taken off. It's like ripping a huge Band-Aid off the back of Jesus. And then it says that they did it again. Put the robe on him, took the robe off, and then put his clothes back on him. And then when he actually gets to Golgotha and they're going to put him up on the cross, they end up taking his clothes off again. A continuous closing and reopening of the wounds.
Also, that whole place is filled with sand.
Right.
So,
And the fact that they're spitting on him.
yeah, the rubbing, when you're beating them, the sand getting into your skin.
Infection, everything that's transpiring through all of this. And then having to go through that and end up having to carry your own cross on your back. And that why did he do that? Why is that happening?
For you and for me.
It's for us. That is the length, that is the depth of servitude that Jesus is offering for the entire world. So what lengths should we be willing to go to for each other?
Close to that.
Not just close. If we're called to this, we would do it. But even for that matter, it's not just a situation of doing it for your own brethren. Even for the lost. To suffer like this for the benefit of others. The text tells us, verse 32, and as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross. And when they were come unto a place called Golgotha, that is to say, a place of a skull, they gave him vinegar to drink mingled with gall, and when he had tasted thereof, he would not drink. Why verse 32? Why bring up this man from Cyrene? Simon.
Just to show how many Simons there are in the Bible.
All right, a lot of Simons.
I don't know.
But even then, from Mark 15:21, to go a step further and to tell us that he's the father of Alexander and Rufus.
Alexander's mentioned later on.
You have a mentioning of an Alexander later. But it's just like when we're thinking about the details that are being given, this isn't just some fairy tale. That here they are, and they are able to pinpoint who this person is. These are historical facts being given to us for substantial proofs that this did happen. We don't just know that it happens from the standpoint of, okay, the Bible tells us you could find this man in history. Or even, let's just say you're back here in the first century and you're wanting to get the facts of what happened. Go find this man. Go find Simon of Cyrene, who's the father of Alexander and Rufus, and get him to tell you if this really happened or not. This is further concrete evidence of real people in real events of what's transpiring. So again, we're not just going through this. It's like, oh, that's a neat little note. It's there for a purpose. And then moving on to Golgotha and the place of the skull. Okay, that's a real place. People can travel over into Israel, Palestine. And you can go and you can see Golgotha. And the reason why it is called the place of a skull is because it's on an elevated plain and it has 3 caves in the side of the cliff, and it looks like a skull.
Let's kill people there.
Yeah, what a fitting place to hold a bunch of crucifixions. And then the mention of verse 34. He gave him vinegar to drink, mingled with gall, And when he had tasted thereof, he would not drink. It's fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies.
What is gall?
It is a type of root or a bitter herb that's going into the vinegar. So the vinegar is already sour. And most of the time it's taken from soured wine. But it's vinegar mixed in with this herb that's further bittering what the vinegar is actually doing, and it's designed to dull the pain.
So why did he not take any after that?
It's a good question. Why didn't he?
No drugs.
If this is designed to numb the pain, dull the senses,
The sacrifice had to be unblemished and perfect and everything that a lamb would go through.
that's right. Jesus was going to feel everything that the crucifixion had in store. To take that would be, to a small degree, a way of escape. It would be like giving morphine to a soldier that's mortally wounded on the battlefield. There's no hope for him. So you just keep giving him morphine until the pain stops and ultimately just dies. But that in knowing that that's what that was, he refused it. Because we know from what we already know of the crucifixion, there's a lot more things that are needing to happen. They're deemed to be fulfilled. And so with that, Jesus has got to have his senses.
No wine.
No wine. Now this is a section where Proverbs 31:6 would come into play. Where it says about giving wine or strong drink unto them that are ready to perish. They're dying and they're in pain. Give them something to be comfortable. But Jesus refused that. To suffer it fully. And to know what was happening. It takes a great deal of courage. So when we're thinking about that, that would be a major temptation on the part of Jesus. Like, yeah, give me all that you've got. So it's almost like women that are giving birth and they want the epidural. Just pump me full of drugs and I don't feel a thing. That's what Jesus could have done. But he refused it. So that he could suffer for us. They crucified him, parted his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet. They parted my garments. Among them, upon my vesture, did they cast lots. And sitting down, they watched him there. As we said in the beginning of our class, we're learning about people, character. And one of the things that we are taught over and over again through the study of the Bible is just how hard-hearted people can be. In the midst of everything that's going on, the only thing that they could think of is the value of his clothes. They cast lots, and we know that they're casting lots on his garments is because it was a goodly garment. And that they didn't want to tear it. And here is the Son of God, the King of the Jews. And the benefits that he is bringing on the spiritual side of things. And yet all they can think about are the physical benefits, and not the preciousness of the blood that's being shed. And that's the case with people living in sin today. Not even considering the blessings that are brought upon them because of this sacrifice. Even for us as being Americans and living in the kind of country that we live in, under the kind of constitution that we have, is because of what's happening here. So much of our Constitution is founded upon biblical teaching. And what is it that gives the Bible, the New Testament, its power? Jesus dying on the cross, shedding His blood, establishing the New Testament. And how many people are enjoying the benefits today of being an American and not even realizing where that came from? A lot. But as we said, the hard-heartedness, the cruelty of people. Here's an innocent man being put to death, and they sit down and they watch. Just how much your conscience would have to be seared to sit down and watch this as a form of entertainment. These are Roman soldiers, but what's happening here, it reminds me of Old Testament Israel. That in the Old Testament, in Genesis 37:23, you have the 12 sons of Jacob, of Israel, and they're fixing to throw Joseph into the pit. And it came to pass, when Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him, and they took him, cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. Now, of course, they wanted to kill him, but they decided, well, we'll just throw him in this pit instead. What did they do next?
Took his coat.
They've already done that. They sat down to eat bread. How could your conscience allow you to eat at a time like this? And that's just how cruel some people are. That Stephen in Acts chapter 7, verse 9, in talking about this event, the patriarchs, that's this situation here, moved with envy, sold Joseph into Egypt. But God was with him. This is how nasty some people are. And this is flesh and blood. Flesh and blood, and they're ready to kill him. And because of what? Envy. Envious of what? He's receiving dreams. He's receiving visions from God. You would think that would be a good thing. But if you're only thinking about yourself, then you become hateful, spiteful in the fact that, well, why is God talking to Joseph and not talking to me? Joseph is the baby of the group. Why isn't he talking to the firstborn? Because that's not how God operates. What are you going to say?
Just thinking back with the king thing.
Yeah.
And going, well, we want a king, going against what God says. No, this isn't good for you. Well, here's the actions of Israel, Jacob having multiple wives, multiple kids,
Yep.
jealousies happen,
Yep.
and all this kinds of, well, I love this woman more, and I love her spawn more than I love all you guys.
Yep.
And so that doesn't take their envy away. They should have been holding on to themselves.
That's right.
Being true, but this is what happens when you go against God, man, and woman.
That competition between Leah and Rachel ends up bleeding down into the children. And it ends up producing this. And just like Jordan said, the way that you alleviate all of that is you stick to what the plan is. Now, granted, what what's their daddy's name? Jacob worked for Laban. Granted, what Laban did, he shouldn't have done. Jacob wanted to work for Rachel. He did work for Rachel, and then Laban does what he does. But really, if you think about it from the standpoint of Laban, Laban shouldn't have made that agreement in the first place. Because it's supposed to be the first daughter who's being married off first. And that Laban should have addressed that. And then, throughout all of it, it said that Jacob, he loved Rachel more than he loved Leah. But then who did God actually choose? So think about it in connection with the Messiah. Which tribe is the Messiah supposed to come from? Judah. Who did Judah come from? Leah.
Wow.
But Jacob is so infatuated with Rachel.
Rachel's so great.
Yeah, she's the best. Blech.
Amen.
But this is the reality of life. These are real things that really happened with real people. And if we don't learn from this type of stuff, then we will fall into traps all along the way. To just be able to learn from their mistakes. And it's just like, to look at this and say, I would never want to be like this, then control this. That's an attitude. That's a way of thinking. You have got to control your thoughts. And even change the way you think about things. Matthew 27:37. That as they've now crucified him and lifted him up, they set up over his head his accusation, written, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Now, in the other accounts, the chief priests come to Pilate angry over this accusation that's being written, that they did not want it to be a statement of fact, but rather they wanted it to be written, "He claimed to be the King of the Jews." Pilate responds, "No, I've written what I've written, and that's what it's going to be." But in John's account, we have an extra piece of information given to us of what's happening here. John 19:20. This title then read, "Many of the Jews, for the place where Jesus was crucified was nigh to the city, and it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Why is that an important detail?
So that the Jews can't lie about what it actually says. Because Hebrews for Jews, Greeks for the Gentiles, and Latin for the Romans.
Okay. Our denominational friends like to play this hypothetical game about, well, what about the people that don't know? Every step is being taken so that nobody gets to claim ignorance. Here it's being written in Hebrew. As Jordan said, that's for the Jews. Greek, that's the common, everyman language. And then you have Latin for even the Romans.
For the Catholics.
Yeah. Nobody's going to miss this. Everyone will know. But also, there's another point. How is it that it's being made possible for everyone to know? It being written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. What is that?
Tongues.
All right, tongues, but
Language.
it's language.
Trinity.
No. What are you having to do to take something from one language into the next language?
Translate.
It's a translation. What does that say about being able to trust translations?
It's right there in the
It's
Bible.
right there. And again, that's what our religious friends try to play. Well, the Bible's been translated so many different times, how are you supposed to know what's right? Just look at this. You can trust a translation. The only reason why anybody would be trying to play that game is because they're just trying to find a way of escape, a loophole, to get around something that's easily visible for everyone to see. All right, so any other thoughts, comments on that before moving on to 38?
I believe one of our friends in Idaho happens to be a Baptist, had a problem with translations. So he would claim that the King James is the translation, so when it says Easter, it meant Easter. When it says wine, it's wine. And you can't go back to the Greek or any of that because the King James was inspired, and those translations back in the day were mingled down and where you can't understand them. So he takes this at face value, not diving deeper
Yeah.
for those issues.
Yeah.
So with what you're presenting right here, wrong.
Yeah, and this is a translation by Pilate being done. He's not an inspired man. It's just simply moving it from one language to the next. It happens all the time. So if it happens in all these other forms of literature and writing, and people hold true to those documents, then why can't it be done here? It can be. Now, granted, to give them the argument, is it possible for a translation to be corrupted? Absolutely it is.
NIV?
Yeah, just look at the NIV, ESV, which those aren't actually translations, those are versions.
North Idaho version.
But to simply take a writing from one language and move it to the next is not difficult. And as long as you have somebody that is trustworthy and that is honest with what is being shown and being laid out, you can trust the translation. The only reason why a person would make that kind of argument is because they understand the authority that the Bible has, and that they're trying to find any way to get away from it, to find a flaw so that it can't be trusted. But you're just not going to find one. All right, so verse 38. Then were there two thieves crucified with him, one on the right hand and another on the left. Mark 15:27, we're told, and with him they crucified two thieves, the one on his right hand and the other on his left. And the scripture was fulfilled, which saith, and he was numbered with the transgressors. It's a quotation from Isaiah 53, verse 12. Therefore will I divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he hath poured out his soul unto death. And he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bare the sin of many, and made intercession for them, for the transgressors. Luke's account records for us in this section, 23:39. One of the malefactors which were hanged railed on him, saying, If thou be Christ, save thyself and us. But the other answering rebuked him, saying, Dost not thou fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation. And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds. But this man hath done nothing amiss. And he said unto Jesus, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. And Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise. Now I just have all of this in this section to give us the full picture of what's transpiring. And I would even be willing to wager, going back to the section with the vinegar mixed with gall. Had Jesus taken of that, this wouldn't have happened. That there would not have been any consciousness to be able to help this man in this situation. So here's one of the reasons as to why he refused it. So that's point number one. But then just point number two, again, we have being presented to us the mind of Christ, not just the mind of Christ, but the actions of Christ. Here's Jesus in the midst of his crucifixion and his suffering. And who is he thinking about? Others. To drink the vinegar mixed with gall would have been selfish. Thinking of himself. Yeah, I'm in pain. I am suffering. This will give me a way of relief. But he refuses that. So that not only can he have this conversation, but that he can have the other conversations and make the other statements that he was needing to make in the midst of his crucifixion. In the midst of this terrible time, he's thinking about others. It's always others first. Matthew 27:39, then they that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads and saying, Thou that destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself if thou be the Son of God. Come down from the cross. Likewise also the chief priests mocking him with the scribes and elders said, He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he be the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. Again, another false statement. Now just think about, if Jesus, not having the mentality that he had, but instead had some worldly mentality, that he behaved like other individuals, other people would behave. And here they are mocking him, goading him, insulting him. And what if Jesus, behaving like some others, and just say, you know what, I'm sick of it, tired of it, I've had it. And he did come off. Had he decided to come down from the cross to prove them wrong, what would that have meant for you and me?
We would prove them right.
Him coming down off the cross would not have proven any of this. Instead, they would use that as a point of accusation against him. Now they would start leaning on the scriptures, and it's like, oh, the son, this guy's supposed to be killed. He's supposed to be slain. Isaiah 53. And that just shows with some people you're not going to win. It would have proved them right, exactly what they were saying. He's not the Son of God. But then for us, it would mean that we would still be in our sins today. Again, in the midst of all of this persecution, who is Jesus thinking about?
Me.
He's thinking about others. Here we have persecution for righteousness' sake. Persecution for the kingdom's sake. Persecution for you and me. Here they are, and they are mocking the very key to greatness, as was discussed in Matthew 20, 26 through 28. Whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. Even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. We have been shown to us firsthand evidence the importance of living for others and the level that we're being called to do so. To stop thinking about ourselves, stop thinking about how I feel or how I think or what I want. And to be like this. Then in verse 43, as we used in our sermon previously, they mock again and saying, he trusted in God, let him deliver him now, if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God. The thieves also which were crucified with him cast the same in his teeth. As we said, they use this mockingly, but you better believe that in this, Jesus' most trying hour, he's got all of his trust in what God has said. You will be slain, but you will rise from the dead. And that we need to learn from this. This is what trusting in God looks like. This is what it means. That when I am facing difficult times, how are we supposed to be able to trust God? We trust God just like Jesus did in his difficult time. You go through it. You endure it. You bear up underneath it. Just as the psalmist says in Psalm 22 and verse 7. All they that see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip. They shake the head, saying, he trusted on the Lord that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him, seeing he delighteth in him. They said it mockingly. But this is exactly what Christ is doing. And that while it would seem the entire world is against you, and here's all these people, and this is what they're saying. Well, if all these people are saying it, then it must be right. That's how we start thinking. That's how we start feeling. But no, the multitude, the mob, they could not be more wrong in what was playing out and happening before their very eyes. Verse 45, now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land unto the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? The 6th hour, noon, to the 9th hour, 3 p.m., for 3 hours, there was darkness over all the land. Now, can you just imagine that? The brightness of noon, and then it's just gone. All of that's being done in connection with this. They are mocking him. He trusted in God. And can't you just imagine if you were in this position, hearing all these things? You don't think your faith would start wavering? And then what does God do? God sends a message from heaven. 3 hours of darkness. And verse 46 comes into play. And verse 46 ends up being a passage in which a lot of people struggle with, and I really don't understand why they do. That they will take the statement of Christ crying out and raising the question of, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And our brethren will teach that the Father literally did forsake Jesus on the cross. That for whatever reason, the Father decides to turn His back on His Son. Now, does that fit into the character of who the Father is? That here is His only begotten Son being tortured and killed for the sin of the world, as was prophesied. And they are making the claim, they are mocking Him and saying, yeah, He trusted in God, let God deliver Him. And then God, the Father, turns His back on the Son. That doesn't fit. How can you trust somebody that's going to turn their back on you in their darkest hour? But not only that, you have Old Testament prophecy telling us that God, the Father, is not turning His back in this situation. Isaiah 53 and verse 10. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. The Old Testament prophet prophesied God is going to see this. He's going to watch all of it. He's not going to turn His back. And even with the explanation that some individuals try to put on this, that, well, Christ took on the sins of the world. God, being a holy God, cannot look upon sin, and thus He had to turn away from looking at Jesus. They don't have any scriptural proof for that either.
And God could be watching the world.
That's right.
Before Jesus took on the sin, because the sin was already there.
And what about any of the sacrifices under the Old Testament system? God didn't watch any of those. What about the year of Jubilee, the Day of Atonement? When you have the one lamb that's being slain for the sins, but then you also have the scapegoat that the priest puts his hands on that goat, symbolizing the placement of sin, all the sins of Israel on that animal, and they send it out of the city. God doesn't see that? God watches all of that. God's watching this. And then, when you tack into this what the Hebrew writer has to say about this event, and as to why Jesus is saying what He's saying at this point. Hebrews 5 and verse 7, who in the days of His flesh, when He had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto Him that was able to save him from death, and was heard, look at this, in that He feared. Jesus was afraid. And to act like there is no humanity on the cross, then how could it be said that He suffers as we suffered? Here is Jesus, and it literally says that he was afraid. And the Father's going to turn his back on him? Though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. Now, you take all of that, and then you tack that onto where that statement is coming from. Matthew 27:46 is a quotation of what? Psalm 22. Now let's go over there and let's read Psalm 22. Psalm 22, a psalm of David, verse 1. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? So there it is at the very beginning of the psalm. Why art thou so far from helping me, and from the words of my roaring? O my God, I cry in the daytime, but thou hearest not, and in the night season am not silent. But thou art holy, O thou that inhabitest the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in thee. They trusted, and thou didst deliver them. They cried unto thee, and were delivered. They trusted in thee, and were not confounded. But I am a worm, and no man, a reproach of men, and despised of the people. All they that see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip, they shake the head, saying, He trusted on the Lord, that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him, seeing he delighted in him. But thou art he that took me out of the womb. Thou didst make me hope when I was upon my mother's breast. I was cast upon thee from the womb. Thou art my God from my mother's belly. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. Many bulls have compassed me, strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. They gaped upon me with their mouths as a ravening and roaring lion. I am poured out like water, all my bones are out of joint, my heart is like wax, it is melted in the midst of my bowels. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue cleaveth to my jaws, and thou hast brought me into the dust of death. For dogs have compassed me, the assembly of the wicked have enclosed me, they pierced my hands and my feet. I may tell all my bones, they look and stare upon me. They part my garments among them, and cast lots upon my vesture. But be not thou far from me, O Lord. O my strength, haste thee to help me. Deliver my soul from the sword, my darling from the power of the dog. Save me from the lion's mouth, for thou hast heard me from the horns of the unicorns. I will declare thy name unto my brethren. In the midst of the congregation will I praise thee. Ye that fear the Lord, praise him. All ye the seed of Jacob, glorify him and fear him. All ye the seed of Israel. For he hath not despised nor abhorred the affliction of the afflicted. Neither hath he hid his face from him, but when he cried unto him, he heard. My praise shall be of thee in the great congregation. I will pay my vows before them that fear him. The meek shall eat and be satisfied. They shall praise the Lord that seek him. Your heart shall live forever. All the ends of the world shall remember and turn unto the Lord, and all the kindreds of the nations shall worship before thee. For the kingdom is the Lord's, and he is the governor among the nations. All they that be fat upon earth shall eat and worship. All that go down to the dust shall bow before him, and none can keep alive his own soul. A seed shall serve him, it shall be accounted to the Lord for a generation. They shall come and shall declare his righteousness unto a people that shall be born, that he hath done this. Now, everybody close your Bibles. That's Psalm 22, where the statement is made, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? What's the next psalm?
Psalm 23.
Which
Lord
is?
my shepherd, I shall not want.
Had God forsaken David? No. Had God forsaken Jesus on the cross? No. If he did, then none of this is true. If the Son of God cannot trust the Father in his time of fear, in time of woe, then how can we? God had not forsaken the Son any more than he had forsaken David. It may seem that way. And as you're reading the Psalms and you're reading about what David is going through, on the run from Saul, having to go hide out in the land of the Philistines, running from his son Absalom, and that he ends up having his entire kingdom turn against him. And David is just a man, and he says, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" Have we never reached that point in our lives? Where we are suffering and we are going through something that we just do not understand, and we sit down and we ask, "God, why are you doing this to me?" Why are you allowing this to happen? That's what's happening with David, huh?
Where are you?
Where are you? That's what's happening with David. But just as we said with Psalm 23, David knew that God had not forsaken him. That he ends up saying in Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd." Does the shepherd turn his back on his sheep? No. The shepherd is ever watchful over the sheep, and he tends to his sheep. So what about his son on the cross?
Even going back to Abraham, about ready to sacrifice Isaac, God was with him,
Right.
stopped him, and God was with Abraham and Isaac, and even Abraham had the faith that something was going to happen.
Yeah. The Hebrew writer tells us that Abraham had such great faith that he was believing that God could raise him from the dead. So as we said, if the Father turned his back on his only Son during the Son's darkest hour, how can I trust the Father not to turn his back on me? How can I trust Hebrews 13:5? Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have, for he hath said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Now what's interesting about this is that this is what God said to Jacob in Genesis 28:15. It's also what God promised to Joshua in Deuteronomy 31, verse 6 and verse 8, and then also Joshua 1 and verse 5. David said this to Solomon, 1 Chronicles 28:20. And David also said it in Psalm 37:25. When David said, I've been young and I've been old, yet have I not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. Matthew chapter 6, Jesus taught the multitude not to be anxious for tomorrow. And why not?
Because today has its own problems.
All right, today has its own problems, and what about those problems?
God's going to take care of you.
God is going to take care of you. Then we get here in Matthew 27 and God leaves. That makes zero sense. that we should look at this event that just as with David and now with the Son of God, that when we go through trials and we do not understand why things are happening the way that they're happening, and that we would even want to question God as to where are you? And how does God take that? Does he take it as an insult? Does he get angry? Or would he not understand? Now he does understand. Because of what his son went through. To suffer like this and have the entire world against you. And you just question, God, where are you? And God's exactly where he's always been. So even with that, you tack onto it the prodigal son. That son goes off and lives worldly, riotously. And where's the father in that illustration?
Waiting.
Right there waiting. And that's an illustration of the Father in heaven. And then we want to get here, and the Father leaves. Just doesn't fit. Just does not fit. We'll stop there. Any questions, thoughts, comments on that section, verse 46, or anything else that we went through?
You think the apostles, as it's stated, Jesus is in the middle, thief on the left and right? You think the apostles saw that and him talking to the thief saying, "You'll be with me"? Like, hey, wait, he's on the left or the right side.
Oh, yeah.
Like Jesus, like.
Okay, so going back to John and Mark, yeah, let one sit on your left and one on your right.
Yeah.
And Jesus makes the statement, you don't know what you're asking. And now here's the illustration. Yeah. I doubt they would be making that connection, but it is a good connection to make.
He took my spot.
Yeah.
He was a thief.
Yeah. And that's why you don't get too high on your own supply. You don't start thinking of yourself bigger than what you actually are. That's a good
Psalm
point.
22, do you think it was a unicorn or a rhinoceros?
Oh, man.